Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm here today with Paul Rabil. He is a current lacrosse player, one of the best in the world, also co-founder of the Premier Lacrosse League, and is really involved in everything that goes on with the league, from the rulebook to marketing, all that different stuff. So really excited to talk to him today. Paul, thanks for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to jump in.
Yeah. First thing I want to understand more about is your background. Like, how did you get into lacrosse and business and marketing and all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, sports more of a linear path than business and marketing, but I started playing lacrosse relatively late for growing up on the East Coast. I started playing when I was 12, 13 years old. I played basketball and soccer and kind of excelling in both. And largely what we're seeing now around sports specialization for the youth, that was less pressure when you and I were growing up. Certainly me, I think I'm a bit older, is AAU was kind of pitching me to go year round in hoops and then club soccer, but it wasn't, again, like it is today. I wanted to keep playing both, and kind of coaches absolved me to do that. And then I was left with a spring sport, got to figure something out. So I was introduced to lacrosse. And I get asked, like, why lacrosse? It's just one of those things, our motor skills, our athleticism, how we are, like, as humans. I think if we're destined, or if we care a lot about sports enough to put in the work, those skill sets work for one discipline over the others. And me, it's just always clicked for lacrosse. So I caught up to speed and accelerated beyond the competition, even starting late compared to basketball and soccer, where I was, like, kind of fighting for relevance. And then, just like anything else in life, the better we are at it, the more we tend to fall in love with it or have a passion for it. Like, passion lives within us. It's not out there, like, that we have to go find. And as you curate and develop skill, you more likely become more infatuated with what that is, whether it's being an accountant or a lawyer or a professional athlete. And then on the business side, I would say a similar development of passion came around for marketing. Business came around the year after I graduated from Johns Hopkins, where I played lacrosse. I was a professional lacrosse player for a league called Major League Lacrosse at the time. I had a $6,500 wage for the season, and Facebook had just rolled out their athlete fan pages, and this was pre-Instagram, pre-Twitter. YouTube had, like, cat videos and trick shots going on, but it was really just the introduction of a touch point of a new medium that had a lot of people on it, where you could share your story. And for me, being a professional lacrosse player, that otherwise just didn't exist, because media prior to social was just television, print, and radio. So I was experiencing that connection with an audience for the first time, and was one of the first to do it as an athlete. Then I started educating myself more around marketing and ways to grow that connection and create awesome content. So I kind of taught myself production and distribution from the streets, and learning social, and then introducing myself a lot of times to these social media platform executives and heads of sports and so on. One thing leads to the next, and I took on a much more kind of active role as a player, like you do in Major League Baseball, except for me in Major League Lacrosse at the time. And the hope was just was getting more and more bleak as the years went on, and I became more of a leader in my advocacy for players amongst my peers, and it led to, I'm giving us a really fast story, over the last 10 to 12 years, a crossroads where, combined with my brother, who's my co-founder of Premier Lacrosse League, and he's our CEO, kind of put our heads together and began problem solving around what we thought professional lacrosse could be, which was taking a similar role to what the UFC did in professionalizing and commercializing the MMA. We felt like that could be done for a sport like lacrosse. So we went to the previous league that I played in around the concepts, and met with them for about 6 to 12 months, tried to acquire them, tried to form some JV. They just kept meeting us with resistance. So we decided to take that bet and go raise our own capital and bring all the players over with us. And that's my life in a nutshell.
Wow. So many things to jump into there.
Yeah.
Such a disruption. The first thing that stood out is $6,500 yearly wage is like a minor leaguer. How was life living like that?
I mean, I lived in my parents' basement. I had a job for 9 months as a commercial real estate analyst in DC, and I'd hop on a flight on Thursdays up to Boston, where I played, and I'd practice Thursday, Friday, play Saturday night, hop on a flight back Sunday, try to make ends meet. And that's how it was. And look, I sports just aren't about compensation, as you know. As an athlete, whether you're in the minors and you see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel to grow professionally and potentially, get pulled up into the majors, and then even like the NFL and the MLB and leagues that preceded us decades before we are now, there's hopefully transparency between league business model, compensation of players, and that includes your executives and front office. You have that level of transparency. As you grow together. So for me, it was never like, hey, I'm getting paid $6,500. And then as I became an MVP in the league, it went up to the league max, which was $16,000 for the season. So that was like the scale. It wasn't about like, hey, I should be getting paid $100K. It was about, let me understand what the league's doing to help itself grow such that revenues can increase and players can get, their fair share of that increased revenue pool. And there was just very little resourcing going into the league. And one of my big gripes is that there was this notion that because the ownership group and a lot of those entrepreneurs, and good for them, they had the foresight of seeing lacrosse grow at the bottom up, say, let's get in and buy franchises of the professional league, and then let's treat it like it's, this unsought, waterfront real estate that at some point, as the sport continues to grow bottom up, the real estate's going to get really valuable, and then someone's going to come in and buy it from us. And that's just the wrong way to go about professional sports. They don't grow on their own. They never have. Basketball, baseball, tennis, golf, NASCAR, you name it. They never have. And it was suffocating our sport at the top down. And then our sport, as a result, from the bottom up, began to slow in its growth, because you have to have the aspirational players. You have to have the network games. You have to have non-endemics coming in and marketing and promoting the sport for the thing to continue to carry on into new fans and new participants. And we weren't getting that. So that moment for me was like, okay, let's like relook at how professional lacrosse is, because the player wages certainly not going to go up, because the league revenues aren't. In fact, they're going down. So let's fix this.
Interesting. So who did you draw inspiration from on that, looking at the whole and the marketing side of it, how to grow it from the bottom up? Who were you drawing inspiration from? Was it other leagues? Was it, like you mentioned, MMA?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I learned, so I mentioned my brother quickly, but he has been, 2 years older than me and played football at Dartmouth. And so he has that student athlete pedigree and that work ethic. But he went immediately into the business world and has been like a serial entrepreneur. And he went from DC to New York to Silicon Valley. And then I was building my business chops by working on a number of ventures alongside him. So I left commercial real estate still on that $6,500 wage, but I was like, I'm going to get an endorsement with a company to supplement the wage. I did that with Under Armour first, then with Red Bull. And then I was like, during all this free time, because professional lacrosse was part-time, I'm going to pick up skills in business and marketing. So we opened up gyms together. I was selling gym memberships in Joppatown, Maryland, which is 30 minutes north of Baltimore. Then that led to our first yoga studio, to a spin studio. Then we started making investments in technology, and we started advising other companies. So that was like the business side of it. And on the marketing side, because I had really one of the first touch points as a niche sport into a niche audience with that Facebook story that I shared, I became early adopter for Twitter and Instagram. And I started really learning natively how to use the tools and how to connect with people. So that was like part of my experience. And then pulling inspiration from others. I would go to sports technology summits. I would go to sports business summits. I would go to MIT Sloan Analytics Conference, South by South Sports. And I would go and just listen. I took inspiration from USC, and in particular, their Ultimate Fighter series, which I think helped turn the tables for them. And yes, that is reality television, which we haven't done. But underneath of it was telling the stories of athletes so people could relate to what was going on, and also educating what went from American understanding of punching heads to now grappling on the mat. Like no one knew what the fuck was happening on the mat. And then Ultimate Fighter started explaining it through the voice of their players. So that's like really an overarching brilliant concept. And then WWE storylines and like even how they do a really good job of telling good versus evil. We know that it's scripted, but it's still good versus evil and winning versus losing, and audiences' relatability to one or both narratives. And then I follow a lot of music. I follow a lot of film. I tend to think they lead in sports trail. All the stuff that we know from baseball, basketball, and football, that's a part of our fiber, because as athletes, to get to the professional level, I mean, we're obsessive with it at a very early age. I think the NBA has probably taken one of the more progressive approaches over the last decade in getting behind their players. So that was something else I would pay attention to.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest frustrations with baseball right now is there's no storylines. You know, you used to have in the '90s, you would have these rivalries. You know, Boston hated the Yankees, right? The Dodgers hated the Giants, and so you had a little bit of a storyline, but players would stay with those teams for a longer period of time, so the fan bases could learn the personalities. You know, you play each other 19 times a year, but you expand that over 5, 6, 7, 8 years when a player might be with the team. All of a sudden, you have this hatred. You know, the fans know that this happened 2 years ago with this player and that player, and now they match up again. So there's a story there. As free agency started to accelerate and players started changing teams a lot more often, a lot of those storylines, at least with the fans, faded, the natural ones. And so now the rivalries aren't as bitter and intense as they used to be, and because the players aren't there nearly as much or nearly as long. And now baseball hasn't replaced it with storytelling. Yeah. There is no storytelling surrounding Mike Trout. There's no storytelling surrounding Bryce Harper. Like, if this is going to happen, it happens by the player himself or potentially by the team if the team does a good job and wants to promote one of their superstars. But there's certainly no concerted effort to tell that story. Meanwhile, like you said, in the NBA, you have storytelling all the time. What you see before every NBA game is the star players walking into the arena in their suits, with their fashion, with their different shirts, their whatever they're showing off, you know. And it's like there's a personality to the player. There's a story behind them, and they talk to him in this way. They have opportunities in public, and they embrace the individuality of the player. So I think that's one of the things that really, you know, frustrates me about baseball. And it's good to hear you say that that's kind of the approach you're taking in lacrosse. What are some of the ways that you've gone about doing that?
Well, it's really good to hear that and have this discussion, because I was brought up to Portland, Oregon, by Major League Baseball to talk to all teams. Had to have been in January, and basically was sharing our social media strategy, how we think about it. And most of the attendees were social media managers and directors and kind of heads of content for all the clubs. I did a little research leading into it, and there were kind of two things, and I'm sure there are others, but two things that jumped out at me, which are two barriers or challenges for Major League Baseball. And both you kind of mentioned. The first is that if you look at the Big Four, which MLB is part of the Big Four, traditional sports, and like big revenue leagues, MLB, different than basketball and football, is that both of the latter leagues, they begin developing their talent while their talent is in the NCAA ranks. And that actually the league doesn't do any development. They get someone like Zion Williamson propelled in the league. Like, the drafts are so big, and it's very like easy to process as a fan. I'm going to watch the NBA draft. Zion's drafted to the Pelicans. I'm going to see him on ESPN later this fall. Right. Mm-hmm. And in baseball, one of the biggest challenges is that you have minor leagues. You have drafts of players who are getting, pulled out of high school. Sometimes they play in college. Maybe they can't. I'm not sure. And then they go to the minor league system. Then they get pulled up and pushed down. So just by virtue of that unpredictability, you can't develop stars as easily as the NBA and the NFL does. And so what you're left with are the cream of the crop, and that's where the MLB kind of invests. So that's backed by data. So I had my manager before this presentation I gave to MLB pull on CrowdTangle the delta of followers between like a Bryce Harper and then like someone who's probably on the margin from a skill gap standpoint. It's like you have your top dozen players that have literally millions of followers, and then the next group, a lot of them have like 10,000 followers. It's a huge delta. So that's a challenge that Major League Baseball has. And I don't know the solution, because there's a lot of value in the minor league system and all that stuff. So that was one. And then two is, I think, similar to hockey, Major League Baseball has a ton of tradition behind it that makes it's like a catch-22. It makes the players in the game the pastime that it is, and like the game of America, but it also limits the athlete's ability in a world where millennials, Gen Zs, and definitely Gen Alphas, which is the next group behind Gen Zs, like feel the connection and the humanness that athletes have and want to show. For example, God forbid you flip a bat when you hit a home run, right? Like you just can't do it. And like, you don't want to talk shit in a press conference. Like it happens from time to time, and when there's a fight, it's amazing. It's like viral and everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying like, hey, let's promote fighting in MLB, but like there's very little, it's far more rare to see that in baseball than it is in basketball and football. And then hockey has that kind of traditional culture where they're very respectful. They leave it on the ice and they step away. And being respectful, again, is important, but you've got to embrace personalities in professional sports. And that's what we think about is like, man, lacrosse is nowhere near the big four. And our athletes have never had access to platforms and microphones where they can amplify who they are. Now they do. So we're not only giving it to them, but we also, Trevor, have to like retrain them, because the last bit of media training they had was in college. And college, you're taught to like sit up straight in a press conference and compliment your opponent and say you got lucky, right? So you got to break through that, because at the core of every athlete is like, no, I'm not lucky. I've worked my fucking ass off for this. And I had to compete one-on-one. You can say like, yeah, that guy's gotten the best of me before, but not this time. And like, people just want to hear authenticity. Because of social media, it's brought out, basically an entire audience that has X-ray vision around authenticity. And if you're not getting that, you're just less likely to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that I talk about all the time is people get hammered. The second they step into professional baseball, they get hammered by the media directors. Okay, this is how you say words without saying anything at all. This is how you just get through the interview and get onto it. Don't say anything that's going to cause any trouble, because one media director may have to worry about 400 people in an organization. And so if there's one problem, or if there's a bunch of different like controversies going on, you just can't handle it. At the same time, it just kills that player's brand, the authenticity of it, and then the reach of what he could be saying, and the superstar that he could become. A great example is last postseason. Alex Bregman hits a home run and carries his bat to first base, right? And so it's kind of this like, he shows people up, and then it's this big story. Well, Juan Soto comes up and says, "Okay, I'm gonna get you." And he hits a home run that went further and carries his bat all the way to first base. So now you have this really authentic like, oh, you beat me, but now I came back, counterpunch, beat you, and now you have this kind of like heavyweight type fight analogy going on, right? Juan Soto came out in the press and was like, "Oh, I don't know, it looked fun, so I did it." And so that kind of contributes to the narrative. And then Bregman comes out and apologizes and like kills the situation, and then you don't hear about it at all. This was the main storyline going on it made it so compelling,
It was so compelling. I remember that.
And that's exactly what baseball tells you to do, though, is come out, apologize, kill it, and just lay low. And I don't think that's good for the sport at all. But trying to break that culture that's been established for 100 plus years now, is so difficult. What are some of the strategies?
The tricky part too that I'll add is, and this is part of the challenge in the NFL, if you're not a quarterback or a skill position player that is just head and shoulders better than others, versus basketball, where basketball, the longevity of top talent is not only greater than other sports, but they have a top-down and bottom-up level of trust. So if you look at baseball and football, per those two examples, if you're not one of the few, like the dozen guys with millions of followers that have pretty much locked positions or feel confident and comfortable, or quarterbacks, the game is highly commoditized. And so as much as I implore athletes often to like show their personality and be embraced, because they'll grow, and you see that one-to-one, that growth happens quick. If you have GMs and ownership and coaches, they're going to bench you or trade you or waive you. Like, this is our livelihood. So I don't blame athletes in those respective sports for not being as vocal as they'd like to be, or for complying with those director of comm messages, because they have millions of dollars at stake. And until they've reached a level of comfortability or trust or fame, they can get kicked out. So it's very much top down. for these organizations if they want to see their athletes become more vocal. Well, you got to build the trust, because right now there isn't it.
Yeah, yeah. Changing it from the top down and getting teams to understand how they can promote their team and their players better and educate players on how to do it in a way that's not going to be negative to the team, not going to draw negative attention, but just leaning into moments is so important. It's something that, you know, with how slow baseball moves, because traditionally baseball makes changes very, very slowly. It's a daunting task, and something that, you know, I'm trying to push through, because I recognize the future of the game depends on it, but you know, it's going very slowly. So have you had any success? Anything that you've found is any strategy that's more beneficial or less beneficial in trying to change that culture on the education side?
Yeah. So, well, there are a couple of things there. So we think about our sport. We're a challenger. So we are given more cloud cover to be aggressive and change things. You know, baseball is like, there's a lot of macro level conversation around the game being slow and not conforming to millennials and Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, like appetite and their kind of attention span, and the competition with the other leagues and then the emerging leagues. But in the end, like, baseball is still a top 2, top 3 revenue generating sport in the world. Valuations of teams continue to increase. And so there's a more tricky balance versus what we have licensed to do as an emerging league, which is we just got to disrupt and go. So when we launched our league last year, we kept the principles of like 10 on 10 and how lacrosse is seen, but I view specifically that sport is a form of entertainment, in another level, a form of show business. So if it's not distributed well, if it's not consumed well on television, then you're not going to be successful. And if you're not telling the stories of your athletes, which are going to be distributed on television or second screens, you're not going to be successful. And everything starts with the product. So we started looking deeply into, what do people like about lacrosse? What do they don't like? What's the biggest challenge from a viewership experience historically with college lacrosse on television? Well, few people can track a ball if they've never played, because it moves fast. And you're like, so who has it? So there's rules, there's following the visual. So we changed the ball color, and it was pretty simple for me. I used to tell MLL this. I was like, hey, you know, tennis has sunk millions of dollars into research around color palettes of the tennis ball to pick up on a 100-mile-an-hour serve. We shoot the ball 100 miles an hour. It's called optic yellow. Let's change the fucking color. And no one would do it. That was like pretty simple for us, being single entities. So we changed our ball color. Then what we also did is looked at the benefits of kind of the NBA, where one of them in soccer is you have athletes playing for the entire game on the field or on the court, playing both sides. And so our game, while it's considered by traditionalists the fastest game on 2 feet, visually it doesn't come that way, because the field is 110 yards long. So it actually feels kind of slow. So we brought the field in a little bit more. We lowered the shot clock from 60 seconds to 52. We wanted to increase the pace. And so we made some rule changes that I thought were advantageous for us. And that was a big thing. And then the way we broadcasted it. So one of our big things last year that stood out, and we were up for an Emmy nomination in sports, was that mic'd up isn't novel across professional sports, but having hot mics on field when athletes are doing their craft is, especially for a real competition. Other leagues have explored doing it in all-star formats. But for us, we took the technology that you see an offensive coordinator have with a quarterback on field, in helmet, in ear, and we gave that to our broadcast announcers on NBC to communicate with players on the field after they scored a goal or were coming off, or like analyzing the play from the sideline. So that's the type of like stretch innovation that we needed to do.
That's huge. That's huge. That's something I've been asking for a lot more, is like, just let the players talk during the game. It's so compelling.
Right.
So we did it last spring training. He put a hot mic on me, and I was out there pitching and whatever, and went viral. You know, we released it, went viral, got 1.5 million views in a couple days, and MLB retweeted it and then sent us a notice that we can't do it anymore.
What was the logic?
That there's basically, we had to conform to the all the different hoops that you have to jump through. So just to keep it brief, you have to go to MLB and ask for permission to do it. They have to go to the rights holder of the game and get permission. If both of them are okay with you doing it and don't want that audio and video for themselves, then they tell you that it's okay to pursue it. So then you have permission to go ask the player and ask the team. If the team approves it, then you have to go back to MLB and say you have approval from the team, and then they have to tell the other team. If the other team doesn't want a mic on the field, no go, and they have to tell the umpires. If an umpire doesn't want a mic on the field, no go. So by the time you go through all the different corporate hoops, it's like a month or 2 month process by like everyone communicating how slow it works. So then you just miss the moment, and then nothing ever
Not only
gets
do you
done.
miss the moment, the thing about like in the movie business or in the reality or follow doc business, they say you always keep your cameras rolling and always keep your mics on. And you go through those approvals, of course, before you shoot anything. But those moments come from spontaneity. So if you have to go through 2 months of approval and then you get all that approval, odds are you're not going to get the bite that you had. So I hear that. It's one of the things that we talk about actually internally. So we're actually a true single entity as a league, meaning we can make decisions really quickly, and we built our business that way out of the gates. And that might evolve over time as we grow and we have individual owners invest and come in and take teams, and you have to get approval, like you said, across the board. But being more nimble is advantageous for any league or any startup. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that we come up with has been done or something has been kind of poached by another league, but there are thousands, in some cases tens of thousands of pages between Players Association collective bargaining agreements, RSNs, national broadcast teams, umpire associations that you have to like restructure if you are going to innovate even slightly around taking a mic from post to hot. And it's like, wow, this is why these leagues aren't doing it. It's because they're so, they have these 10-year CBAs that are really difficult to come back.
Yeah. What's been the process like in developing the rule book? Because I know you were intimately involved in actually developing the rule book. How thick is the manual? How long did it take to put that together?
Yeah, it took a while. So we had outside legal, and then we have our inside general counsel. And basically what you do when you build a business, especially a business of this size, is you have to be really process oriented, and you have to live in your calendar. So we do what's called like sprints within the company. Like we launched sports betting last month, and right now we're in the middle of a sports betting sprint where we have like key stakeholders in the business decisions that we're making across marketing, creative, BD, strategy, that get on these daily calls, and we go through like the final touch points to get going for our championship series that starts on July 25th. So back in 2017, we were building the league. We were sprinting really everywhere, but we would have daily stand-ups, and within each stand-up was a component that we'd be focusing on that day for the rule book. And then we'd have, legal basically drafting. So the point is like a lot of the stuff that we do feels enormous. And certainly in hindsight, I go back and I'm like, I would never do this again. It was like really just day and night work for 2.5 years that had a ton of challenges. So it wasn't just like show up and do the work. There was a lot of like soft elements to this not happening that we were able to get over. But in a case like building a rule book, if you can just simplify it and build a grid around this is what we're going to do this day and get that done next day, get it done before you know it, the handbook's built. So it's hundreds of pages, but it's just it takes like muscle and consistency.
Yeah, that's crazy. I've been thinking about doing some programs myself on training and whatever else, and it's kind of like a rule book. You have to go from the beginning, like what are the principles here that we're trying to accomplish? Okay, how do we account for all the different scenarios and stuff like that? And I just, while playing and doing all the other stuff that goes into a business, like finding time to do that is very hard. So
Super hard.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like what was your, how long were you working in a day? Are you pulling like 16-hour days? What's the,
Oh yeah.
how did you fit training in around that? Like how'd you balance all that?
Yeah, I didn't train as much and still like kind of concede the training in certain rest periods. I've learned a lot about what it takes to be a professional athlete going through this level of build. Like I've always been an entrepreneur on the side. Like I said, I was building gyms and I started my own online instructional platform. I started an event business. But to the level of involvement in building a sports league, it's all consuming. So I would be doing 16, 18-hour work days, and you get more efficient. So instead of like a traditional workout for an athlete where you carve out like a 2-hour block to do the work, and then sometimes come in on like later that day to do like skill work or positional stuff. What I learned that I was actually missing, that was probably the biggest, probably like the biggest efficiency that led to, me not, I think I performed at the level that I was used to performing in last season, was just rest period. So there's nothing like a professional or even a collegiate blowout workout where when you're done, you literally feel like you boxed, like you're like, and you need to rest. You let your muscles rest, and you let your mind rest. So there was no turn off for me, which I think even in hindsight, when I get my workouts in and lifting and running, I would just immediately go and I'd be on a call or I'd be in a meeting. And so my muscles just lacked the recovery. My mind lacked the recovery that it needed. So, it's not ideal, like being an athlete and an entrepreneur. And so you gotta like be willing to make that sacrifice and know that sacrifice will not carry you in a direction. Like if you're an athlete and want to continue to do this. So for me, if I was 25, and which I didn't have the business or the creative skill set that I did when I was 32 starting this league, but I'm not sure I would have wanted to basically acquiesce on my career trajectory from an on-field standpoint, because I was winning MVPs and championships then. I likely wouldn't have done this. I probably would have done this. And right now I got to here, and now I'm kind of doing this, trying to do a little bit more training, but we'll see where this season ends up.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I struggle with, is the balance of it. It's like if I don't do enough off of the field, then I just drive myself crazy thinking about baseball nonstop, right? It's my mind runs and runs, and I overanalyze everything. So I have to have something else I'm doing. But the way my personality is, I get obsessive with things. So when I start doing something else, like I will do that all day. Like I will wake up at 10:30 in the morning, and I will start working, and I'll look up, it'll be 2:00 in the morning, and I'll be, I probably should get some sleep. But that's obviously not optimal for athletics. So trying to find that balance between the two it's a constant balancing act, and this time period with coronavirus has been interesting for me, because I feel way more stressed during the off season than I do on season. On season, you have built-in rest periods at least for us. You're on a plane for 3 hours, and while it's not the best rest situation, like you can't really do anything. You don't have cell service, you don't have internet, and so you're sitting there like, okay, let me talk to my teammates, and you get that kind of recovery time. Then you get to the hotel and you fall asleep. So now you have 10 hours or whatever of kind of recovery time. In the off season, it's like I'm living at home. So I go work out for 3 or 4 hours a day, throw, train, all that, and I come home, and there's no one there stopping me from staying up till 3, 4, 5 in the morning if I don't, have hard limits on myself. So pretty familiar with that whole
I felt that way too. I mean, even when I was building other businesses that weren't as intense, but when I was playing in the other league previously, and I had this same experience in the PLL in our inaugural season, as I was wondering how it was going to be for me on game day. In other words, like, would I step up on the field and see, something going on with the LED boards around sponsorships that I worked on a deal with, or, something in the stands are taking place, or, all these different things that go on to putting a production and event on. Would that be distracting for me? But it wasn't. And, something about being in season is actually a lot less stressful, minding the wins and losses, than being in the off season. The off season, our distractions carry on just like every human. But when you're a professional athlete in season, day before game comes, like my mind almost shuts all the other shit out. Mm-hmm. It happens on its own. And like, my brother was always worried about me even last year, like, where's his head going to be at? I was like, didn't even have to think about it. Like, pregame nap, I'm ready to rock. And it's just what's special about sports.
I don't think you get to the level of being a professional athlete without having some ability to do that, right? Because you have,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, there's distractions and everything. You got family, you got relationships, you got friends, you got, what business, whatever it is that you're into, and but you have to find a way that when you step on the field, that you lock in. Otherwise, you never make it.
Yeah.
So it's a really unique property that I didn't really realize that I had. I mean, I knew I always went to baseball as kind of a respite. If things were going bad, I would go train or something because that's what I got away to. But, with all the stuff going on, you step on the field, the adrenaline takes over, and you just don't even realize, you don't remember anything until after the game. Then it all hits you again. You do a lot on the marketing side, and like you mentioned about the LED boards and putting events on and jumping into that. What's it like going into these corporate sponsors? Like, I mean, you're talking to like big, like some of the biggest brands in the world. What's that process? Is it daunting? How much preparation goes into that? How long are those negotiations? What's that world like?
Yeah, I mean it's really difficult, but it is a large revenue stream for all pro sports leagues. You have your media rights and branded content, you have sponsorship, then you have tickets, you have merchandise, and then some groups like us have academies or youth component to our structure of our company. But sponsorship is multifaceted. It continues to evolve because of access to players, access to social. Traditionally, it was an affinity play in sports where a brand would hook into a league to get access to an audience that was sticky to the league. And they would do that through a network deal, and they'd buy ad units, or they'd buy in-game features on the broadcast, or they'd buy assets on site, like an A-frame or LED boards or signage in stadium, or they'd take the naming rights for the stadium. So that was like soup to nuts sponsorship. It's evolved in a really deep capacity. And you have agencies that are buying media on behalf of brands, agencies that are doing influencer, experiential marketing stuff on site. So the sales cycle is typically 12 to 16 months for a brand. I learned this in the nonprofit world, and it's very much similar to sports and even athlete endorsements for brands. This notion that like if you're best in class, or if you're the pro league in your sport, that like Visa, MasterCard, Capital One, or Ticketmaster, SeatGeek, or AB versus Coors Miller, like one of them will come in because there are all these open categories. That's not true, because the reality is for all these brands, they have their allocated advertising budgets on an annual basis. A portion of that is clipped off for sports, and that, in largely all of their cases, has been counted for. And that traditionally goes for, depending on the CMO and the brand team's direction, they want to be in baseball and football. They typically look at all 4 seasons, so they have to have a presence across sports in different seasons. So the short of it is, you got to understand that there's not a pile of cash that's unspent for. So there's not like, just because we're the PLL, or just because I'm the next greatest player in sport Y, that I'm going to get a sponsorship with brand Z. That doesn't exist. You have to actually convince a brand to probably pull money from somewhere that they're already invested into you. That's hard, no matter who you are. And then secondarily is understanding like the macro calendar, the interest of a brand, the moments in society right now. A lot of the brands are shifting over to social causes, in particular ways to promote racial injustice and fight systemic racism. Just over these last 3 weeks, brands turn that quickly. So you have to be incredibly prepared. You have to be willing to cold call, cold email. You have to be persistent as hell. You have to be well networked. You have to know a lot of the decision makers. And then in the end, you have to be very metric oriented, because brands don't spend on affinity anymore. They want to spend on a return on investment. So you've got to have a good analytics team. You got to have a good content team. You've got to have a strong business. You got to give these brands access to not only the audience, but the players. So it's changing. I know there's a lot, but I feel like it's the most dynamic aspect of sports, but also yields the largest margin if you do it well.
Yeah, it seems like it's really a niche market now. Like brands are looking for their specific target audience, and if you're MLB and you don't have their target audience, but the PLL does, they're going to go to the PLL. And so
it's possible, but they'll also go, well, the PLL has our target audience, but not at scale. So then we go, our target audience is this. It's similar to Bleacher Report. let's go cut a JV with Bleacher and then go back to the brand and say, the foundation of our partnership is with the PLL on field and with players and with our team's IP. But then we're going to amplify it through Bleacher's audience because they get X amount of million impressions per post. And so that's like some of the other triangular work you have to do as being a smaller league. Whereas you're going to get scale with baseball. You're going to get scale with the NFL. So then it becomes about, does that scale actually matter to the brand?
Yeah, interesting stuff. I got a couple more questions for you.
Right.
Fans, the fan experience. With baseball, and I mean with all major sports, the fan experience at home is becoming so good that people are less likely to show up in person. What are some of the things that you're doing to make the fan experience with the PLL better?
Yeah, well, it starts with venue, because no one wants to show up to a venue that's average or subpar, because you're already fighting an uphill battle versus the television screen and the experience from at home and technology and so on. So that's number one. And I know baseball is addressing, they have beautiful ballparks, but they're addressing times of games because we're both playing in the summer. And a thing that we picked up on feedback last summer is sometimes if you play a 3:00 game, it's really hot. And that is aggravating for a fan. You don't want to sit in the sun for 4.5 hours. So stadium's number one. Number two is the experience that the fans get on site. So their access, their the technology you're playing, the product on field, the multiple screens, the PA, the LEPs, your VIP services, upgrades, all that stuff is unique to the fan experience on site, different than what you can get at home. And then the third is we've built experiential marketing around our products. So that means we have what's called a Premier Zone. It's basically our fan fest. And you get access to all of our brand partners. You get access to athletes that lives before, during, and after games. And then kind of brought to life thereafter is our players have always been this case in professional lacrosse, but they spend meaningful time with fans. It's a viral thing I see in baseball too, is when, after each inning, a player is running in from the outfield after he caught a ball and he tosses it to a fan. Those miniature experiences that fans get are invaluable. So you can provide that with more opportunities is what we do. So our players sign autograph after game. They're not mandated to, but a lot of them do because they realize that one-to-one connection is actually helpful for them. So those are the ways that we think about it. And then lastly, being data oriented is we carry an NPS. So that's your net promoter score. And after every game, and then followed on over email throughout that week, we submit surveys to those who attend to capture basically their experience. And an NPS is industry regarded as the experience that your fans or your consumers are getting at retail or at a game. And our NPS was a 72 last year. So the scale is -100 to 100. And the question is basically how likely are you to refer a friend to attend this game? So it's pretty simple. But 70 and above is considered world-class. Amazon and Apple have a 72 and 68. The NBA's at a 39. Tesla's a 94. And so what that is helpful and why we keep track of that is, one, not only are we creating a good experience for our fans, but two, when we go to brands about selling local sponsorship and activation in our Premier Zone, if they know the fans are having a kick-ass time, that's somewhere they'll want to be.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That's good. That's cool. I think MLB struggles in addressing the fans and figuring out what it is they actually want to see. It seems like there's a lot of proposals that come out about we're going to 3-batter minimum, we're going to shorten the game time, we're going to this, that, and the other. But the fans that I've talked to personally don't think any of that stuff really matters. There's other things that they're concerned about. So polling the fans is a really good idea. I like that a lot. Getting that direct feedback, as long as you have someone that can actually look it over and make actionable change. And obviously in your position, you're able to make those changes on a much quicker basis because of the structure and the size of the league.
Yeah, I mean, look, the other thing that eats away at your NPS is price for parking, concessions, right? One of the reasons why the Atlanta team in MLS crushed is that the Blanks decided to lower all concessions, $2 hot dogs and $4 beers or something like that. I don't think those are the exact prices, but they were all like well under market versus attending a Falcons game. And then all of a sudden it was like, all right, fans are there, they're watching a cool product, there's community, and it's cheaper. And so when you show up at a baseball park and you're paying $14 for a beer, you're kind of like, fuck this. Yeah, right? Like it's just so expensive. I'm less like I'd rather pay for my own case $14 and watch it from home at this stage.
I went to a spring training game with my agent, and for two people we kept track of how much it cost, and between parking and concessions and tickets, and we sat down the third base line like pretty close to the foul pole, so we didn't have the best seats, and it was like $160 to a spring training game. It's like, this is ridiculous if fans can't afford that, and there's no reason it needs to be that. It's just businesses have jacked up prices because they can squeeze a little bit more out, and the long-term effect of it hasn't been seen yet because they're not seeing the decline in fans and how difficult it's going to be to get them back. And it's frustrating because I see all these things, we're basically just like sprinting towards a cliff and have no idea that a cliff is there. Couple more things. One, where do you want to, what's your vision for the PLL when you're done, when you retire, and I'm sure you'll be part of it for life, but where do you want to see it?
Yeah, I think we have the ability to be the next UFC. And look, I as an investor, I see a lot of pitch decks that come through, and we're going to be the Uber of, we're going to be the Netflix of. And so I realize that might sound trite, but I really believe that if you look at a sport like ours, where we didn't build the sport from scratch, lacrosse has been around for 1,000 years. It was early adopted by college sports. It was one of the first NCAA platforms when the NCAA was conceptualized. And it has continual youth growth and international growth as we got IOC recognition, provisional recognition in 2018. So this is a sport that already has product market fit, like MMA did, although you could argue that better market fit because we have participation growth. You don't see UFC betting on, more kids fighting at a young age. That was one of my early things, is like pro lacrosse used to bet on participation numbers. You know who's not also betting on participation numbers? The NFL. And they're like doing just fine, right? Mm-hmm. So participation is important, but so is just creating an awesome product that fans who no longer play sports want to watch. So I believe we can do what the UFC did to MMA tactically through media, marketing, experiential, on-site, all this type of stuff. And so that's my hope. I don't need to become like the fifth or the sixth horseman when it comes to major sports leagues. But I do think that pro lacrosse has so much room to grow and take the sport global. So that's my goal. Like we quantify it through case studies and business models as we went and raised money from our shareholders. But I think the short of it is there's a lot of growth. You track it through viewership across television, you track it through sponsorship commitment, you track it through player wage increase and player personality and celebrity growth. Awesome.
Last thing I got for you, if you're talking to a fan that's never been out to a lacrosse game, you're giving them the pitch why they should come check out the PLL. What's the pitch? Where can they find you? Where can they get more information?
Yeah, so I'll make this short because everything I've been doing has been long-winded. Look, I've learned over time, like trying to sell a sport to someone, you can do your best pitch, but in the end, whether you're a fan of a sport or a product is solely up to like how you experience and how you identify with that sport or product. So my pitch is, don't listen to me and why I love lacrosse. Just tune in on July 25th. So we have our championship series, which was our solution to shortened season and due to COVID. And also like build something different. So instead of a 15-week season, what we did is we compressed it into the Olympic window that NBC had previously scheduled out, which is 16 days. And we have 20 games. So it's going to be like a World Cup where there's a group stage for the first week, second week, single elimination. So it's the most exposure lacrosse has ever gotten on television in a condensed period. And watch it. And if you like it, I think our steps are very clear because we're active on social and we'll be active on broadcast. But all I ask is just to tune in. We're on NBC Sports and NBC July 25th to August 9th.
Awesome. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me. It's been fun. I've learned a lot. Hope to talk to you again soon. I'm sure there's a lot more things we can dive into. But appreciate you joining me, and good luck with the launch of everything.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, and you reach out whenever you want. I look forward to building that relationship.
Awesome, man. Have a good one.
Cool.